Hi, everybody. I see we already have a great crowd. My name is Bethany Beavis, Director of Events here at CREtech, and welcome to our webinar today, Effective Sales and Marketing Strategies for Real Estate Startups. This is our last consulting webinar of 2020. We launched this series about 6 months ago as a way to really deep dive on the topics that our consultants find most important in real estate technology and innovation. These themes have been carefully selected and researched by our team of CREtech consultants and advisors. Don't fret, because they are hard at work on our content calendar for 2021, and we're excited to announce that soon. I want to take a second to highlight some of our other upcoming events. Our very last event for 2020 is our virtual demo day on the 15th with me. Please join me. And then we're going to kick off 2021 in a really big way with our Business Intelligence Summit at the end of January. Head over to CREtech.com/events to find out more and to register for these events. All right, let's get in it today. We're going to hear from several of our world-class consultants and some incredible guest speakers on the best marketing and sales practices for growing real estate tech companies. So you have this great product, you're going to revolutionize the industry, but do you have the right sales tactic, marketing plan, and context strategy to grow your startup? Our experts are going to share what works and what to avoid. So let me introduce our moderator today. It's Matt Partridge, co-founder and CEO from Infobode. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Bethany, and thank you, CREtech, for hosting this panel. We have a fantastic lineup for you, and I'm going to let them all introduce themselves shortly. My name is Matt Partridge, and I am the CEO and founder of a company called Infobode, which is an information and research platform. And without further ado, I'm going to kick straight off and get the panel to just give a quick line on who they are and the angle that they're coming at this from. Starting with you, Jan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jan Kamish. I'm the co-founder of a company called BuyProxy. Prior to that, I spent, which feels like 100 years in private equity with, companies like Fortress. And I'm really taking an angle of, partnership and collaboration that sales forces can, implement to win business and succeed gaining new business.
Perfect. Thank you, mate.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Matt. Sorry about that. My name is Mark Kelkworth. I'm the founder and CEO of Atypical. Atypical is a full-service digital marketing agency that works exclusively in the commercial real estate space. So just here today to share some of our learnings and experience and hopefully, help out where we can.
Perfect. And Alec?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. My name's Alec Page. I'm a vice president at an early stage venture capital fund called RET Ventures. We're an industry-backed fund. So all of our investors are owners and operators of multifamily and single-family rental real estate portfolios. So we invest in companies trying to sell to our LPs as customers. So largely B2B enterprise software companies, some hardware as well, and then the occasional B2C company as well.
Great. Cassandra?
Hello, everyone. Cassandra Small here with Quinn. We are a public relations agency specializing in real estate, commercial, retail, and residential. And I will be obviously taking the PR point of view here.
Perfect. And last but not least, Nate?
Thanks so much, Matt. My name is Nate Lowenthal. I'm a vice president at Camber Creek. We are another venture capital firm in the real estate technology space. Our limited partners, similar to RET, are all real estate owners and operators, although we have folks across verticals, so multifamily, commercial, retail, warehousing, hospitality, et cetera. We just closed our third fund, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, an absolutely fantastic panel that can certainly shed some light on effective sales and marketing strategies. So before we begin, before any sales or strategy can begin, you have to obviously analyze what is going to be within that sales and marketing strategy. So Jan, starting with yourself, what are the key things to think about?
Being a technology platform, I think the first thing when you think about what you're going to build is user cheaper, better, right, than what's out there today. And how do you build a tech around a pain point? What's the pain point that you're solving in the market? Whether it be, there's really two segments. There's potentially trading and there's building operations and building efficiency. And so in those, what are you doing to create an environment where people do it faster, cheaper, and better? And then lastly is really understanding your audience. Like, who are you selling to? What pain point are you solving for? What are their personas? How do you establish their personas? And is it, in real estate, is it about trade rents? Is it about turning off the lights? Is it about valuing a piece of property? Define the pain point in that and solve for it. And then, provide a compelling argument why it's faster, cheaper, and better.
Anyone like to add to that?
Yeah, I would love to echo the point of knowing your audience, right? Starting early and knowing who your customers are going to be, and not being too broad with that if you're early on in your growth story. Finding who your kind of best fit customer is going to be, those kind of champions, whether it's enterprise or direct to consumer, where you're going to start, where you're going to be most effective, and then as you expand from there, understanding the different audiences that you're selling to, and how your product might need to change in order to address those different customers, because your value proposition is not going to be the same to every customer that you sell to.
Yeah, something from our side that I think is extremely important is making sure that you have a good sort of understanding and well-defined sort of objectives when going into developing a sort of marketing strategy. So, when we work with our clients to develop a strategy, the point that we start at is making sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we're actually trying to achieve, and then working backwards from there to sort of right fit the marketing strategy and tools and techniques to allow us to then achieve those business goals. So I think that's an important first step as well.
And what I love so much about this group of panelists that I'm sitting here with right now is the fact that you each represent a body that I would be working very closely with. So Jan, you mentioned these pain points, Alec, you mentioned that objective, the goal, the audiences that you're building this product out for. When PR comes in, we work with you, Mark, the atypicals of the world, if you will, and every type of company that is on this webinar right now. I get to work with you and take the objective, take the strategies and use that and build out a public relations plan and timeline. And Jan, you mentioned these pain points. These pain points can also then be used to craft a message. I can use those. Let's use that narrative and control the messaging, making a solution out of those pain points.
Great. And Mark, coming to you quickly on, one common strategy is to throw a lot of money at some of these paid advertising business models. You can spend a lot of money doing that, can't you? When is that the right strategy? What do you need to look at to make sure that's the right thing to be doing?
Yeah. So I think it's, like I said, I think that the starting point is making sure that you've got those objectives well defined, so you can always draw and sort of measure your ROI against a real business sort of objective. The second thing I think is to have a good sort of reporting, structure, and make sure that you have all of the necessary measures in place to look at the specific events that are triggering off to sort of lead people to where you want them to be on your website or emails or paid campaigns. Make sure you have all of the tracking parameters and all of the pieces of content that are going out through social or paid partners. So then in analytics, you can sort of tie up all of that work to a specific event or a specific campaign. Make sure you've got all of those goals set up in analytics. So really take the time before you push play on any paid advertising that you've set up the reporting structure so that you can analyze the data and make sense of it once it starts coming in. And then the third point I would say is kind of test small, prove the funnel, and then scale. So instead of throwing everything and hoping for the best, start with a smaller audience, test the funnel, test the language, test the creative, test the different platforms that are available to you. Once you have that funnel and you understand the conversion points between those different points in the funnel, and you're confident that you kind of have a model that works, you can then start throwing more sort of dollars into it and scaling it with confidence.
And Mark, I love that you mentioned analytics. I think even from a PR perspective, and we take a look at what COVID has done during the last 8 to 9 months, the fact of the matter is so many companies, small, big, medium, are looking at their bottom line with such scrutiny that even from a PR perspective, we have really had to tailor our analytics and data. So we work in tandem with you, the teams, and use Google Analytics. How can we track the referable traffic going to the website from said public relations article? So I do think that's really key and critical, that if you are looking and finding that right PR partner, they are using data and analytics unlike any other time before.
Yeah, I think now is the time. I mean, if you're not proficient in Google Analytics, and I would highly recommend that you take the time to understand the data that's coming into your website. That's I can't recommend that.
I mean, Clive, I agree. I mean, I look at what Clive just asked us, it's easy to identify and get in front of the big enterprise CRE players. I think even using Google Analytics from the smaller brands, sometimes it's not the New York Times or Wall Street Journal that's going to reach your right audience. We might have to go even smaller, more niche. So hopefully, Clive, that addresses a little bit. We like to tailor, and just as Mark said, refining the audience, testing big or small, and then moving out forward. I do think we should do that in your approach too, is identifying the smaller target audiences first and moving from there.
And understanding things like attribution reporting models, that the typical approach is the last click or the last point of touch, you attribute 100% of the sort of conversion to that last touch. But in reality, there's so many touch points with a digital marketing sales strategy that you need to understand all of those touch points. So how much impact did the social media, the press release, the email blast, and then finally that paid ad that got somebody to take action? If you don't have those sort of attribution models set up, you don't have a clear picture of actually what's happening. So
yeah, no, all good points. And Alec, just coming to you. So, I mean, a lot of companies will spend a lot of time on their strategy. They'll do everything that has sort of been said here, and they'll start small and then try and grow it, but they just don't get the traction. So what are some of the pain points, some of the things that companies get wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the earlier point of really understanding your audience. I think, especially when you're looking at kind of the institutional real estate market, I think you can't spend enough time researching your target customers, understanding who the decision makers are, the stakeholders are within their organizations, how their budgeting works, right? Where they kind of land, not just in terms of timing, when they budget for things like the software or hardware you're trying to sell them, but also how their budgeting works, between CapEx and OpEx, right? If there's a way to change your pricing to better fit their needs, that's an important part of your sales process, that if you understand the way their organization works, your sales are going to be made that much easier. And you're going to understand day one how to come in and win those accounts. Understanding their tech stack is also really important. Knowing what other products they're using, their property management software, other vendors that you might consider a competitor. But if you're coming in and saying you're going to need to rip and replace these 3 or 4 things in order to use our product, you might see less success than coming in and saying, you know what, we have an API, we can easily work with these guys. We think that you should use our product instead, but if you choose not to, that's fine. We'll work with whatever you want to work with. And I think that can get your foot in the door, and then you can expand your offerings. So those are kind of, I think, just sales strategies around, understanding the audience and understanding how their organizations work, that will kind of reduce the friction from you getting that initial call to being able to actually close on a pilot or a full rollout and smoothly kind of service those customers.
I think
Just to pick up on. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Nick, go ahead.
Oh, just to pick up on one thing Alex said, when you're, especially if you're pitching a small number of large customers and you really need to win, a couple of them, really understanding the internal decision-making processes at those companies. So, it's almost like you're gathering information. Who is actually going to decide? Is it the person you're first pitching, or is it their boss, or is it someone in a different department? There might be 5 people. There might be a committee that evaluates these decisions. You want to be gathering like highly specific information and convincing person by person all the people required to execute the sale.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo on what kind of Nate and Alec just said. It almost starts with kind of old school real estate, an income statement, right? Understanding the revenue and expenses, and you're solving for, expenses down the road. If a property is operating at 40% or a portfolio is operating at 40% of revenue, and what are the pain points that you are triggering that portfolio could potentially operate at 36% or 37% of expenses. And then to Nate's point is, who's the decision maker in ultimately for that software package? Is it the owner? Is it the property manager? Is it the facilities manager? I mean, who makes the call to write that check? And I think that's critical. And understanding that audience, you may, like as Nate was describing, you might enter with number 3, but ultimately the goal is to get to number 1, and that number 1 is who's writing that check. And for the most part, I think what's really critical to think about is that the person writing the check most of the time needs a big solution. It's not like, hey, I could just solve this on this one example. It's what can you do across a portfolio? What can you do across multiple asset classes? What can you do across different, HVAC, whether it's building entrance, but what are the problems you could solve, and how quickly can you solve them, and how much can you save me?
Yeah, no, really good points. And just quickly on there, if anyone in the audience has any questions, please do submit them on the Q&A. We're going to allow for quite a bit of time to try and get through as many of those as we possibly can. We talked about some of the pain points there and some of the problems that companies have getting into their target market. Nate, just coming to you. Obviously, your Camber Creek have backed a lot of very successful companies in the space. What are some of the lessons that we can take from them that they got right?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, it's always helpful to have a kind of ally to help you sell, like a good pet marketing. Number 1, the point about data from earlier is critical. Being very, very clear-eyed about the critical metric that to evaluate, and also to talk to your investors and show them that you're making progress. Second, at least at Camber Creek, we really appreciate scrappiness. So if you tell me, oh, what we're doing is we're spending a bunch of money on Google AdWords, it's like, well, that's certainly the easiest thing that you could possibly be doing right now. Have you thought about anything more creative? And so, we were talking to a company recently that had done a very, very creative direct mail campaign that had worked fabulously for them because they knew exactly who they were going after, and they hit just those people, and it showed a very, very strong return. And we're like, oh, that made a lot of sense. Another company actually sent out people knocking door to door to sell their product. It's like, it's not Google AdWords. It's a lot harder to sort out, but it might be much, much more effective. Yeah, I think those two kind of things, attention to data and, scrappiness in figuring out a communications and advertising strategy.
Great. Who knew the old school approaches are sometimes the best. And Mark, just on that same point, what, obviously you see lots of different companies. What do you tend to? Is there sort of a common theme that makes some companies more successful than others in terms of the things they're focusing on their sales and marketing strategies?
So I think it's, there's so many different channels and techniques. I think it's good to have a sort of blended approach so that you're not, putting all of your eggs into the Google AdWords basket and hoping for the best. I think to understand your audience and understand the different touch points that you could potentially have with that audience, and look to kind of build that trust up over sort of micro touch points up to the point of them making the decision. The buyer journey is long, and it's different with technology companies than it is with companies selling widgets online. But there is still huge value in building trust and building brand reputation and understanding that it is a journey to get to that point to ultimately write the check. And what are those touch points that you could potentially sort of engage with those prospects along the way, and look for creative ways to kind of engage along the way. They don't all have to convert. You don't, just because you're kind of creating a sort of touch point doesn't mean that that touch point is going to convert them. It's just getting them closer to that point. So, and there's lots of opportunity to kind of get creative with offline as well as online sort of strategies.
Yeah, great. And obviously one of those approaches, Cassandra, is PR. When is investing in PR the right strategy to make, and what is PR's role within the sales and marketing process?
Great question, Matt. I mean, at the end of the day, and just hearing from Alec, Mark, Nate, Jan, et cetera, I need to work with you guys. You first, the company, the brand, the real estate startup, the tech startup needs to also know what their goal, their strategies, their objectives are. So we can then use that to build out that larger PR plan. And Nate, I love that you say beyond the Google AdWords, beyond working together, because it's going to be about marketing, SEO, SEM, me, the PR team working with your paid, your paid advertising team, and looking at social and digital. When does it make sense? You know what, for this brand that we're starting up, it might not make sense for Instagram, but how are we going to make use of LinkedIn? For tapping into a public relations agency, I would make sure internally all of your ducks are in a row, because in order for us to be successful on your behalf, I need to ensure that every point that I'm hitting has already been internally, discussed and strategized. And sometimes we come in so early on where I actually have the great benefit of working with the companies and helping create those brand pillars and identities. Hence why I said earlier, during this conversation, Jan, about using those pain points and actually using them to help with the solution and talking points. Because just as any interview, just as any media member is going to ask you, they're probably going to boil down to what those said pain points are. What are your key differentiating factors? How can we then use those elements and incorporate them not only into the release or the pitch, but your larger strategy? So I would say invest in PR, because again, as I said earlier, everyone is now looking at their bottom line and really scrutinizing it more. And PR, frankly, is probably going to be one of the last things you look at. But ensure that the PR team member that you select is actually able to work with every team member, from marketing, from your advertising team, from your digital side, if you're doing a social campaign. Oftentimes we're working together seamlessly. We need to be part of that team, part of that larger marketing table, and not thought of as an aftermath. But make sure, you're investing probably a little further down the road. I wouldn't immediately put your money into it right at the onset, but right when you're maybe about to launch and we need to get the news out properly.
Listen, I would second that for Sandra and really Mark. Is there is a problem, there is a solution. I think it's really critical to, when you come up with that solution, to really message that correctly, right? And to message that, and that's really Cassandra and Mark where they come in, is to hone that message to get, and then right target audience, right? And there is a right target audience. There's a starting audience that you need to hone in on in the beginning. You need to, when you're starting out, is create a couple case studies, right? Case studies of success. And then some, once you create those case studies, 1 begets 3, 3 begets 7, and so on and so forth. But that starts with the right messaging on the front end. And Mark and Cassandra are critical to that.
Right, and a question for everyone, but Jan, I'll come back to you to start with. Certainly, and I don't think this is a controversial opinion, but certainly over the last few years, there are more and more tech companies piling into this, into the real estate space. It's becoming more and more competitive. And I think a lot of companies feel that they've got an exciting product, they've got their marketing right, they've got everything correct, but they're still struggling. Is the space becoming crowded, and are we spending a lot of time battling for attention from the same clients now?
I don't think so. I think it's still very early days, and probably Nate and Alec are probably best to answer that question. But in my opinion, it's still early days. I think residential is, 10 years, if not more, ahead of us in terms of, their development around things that operate a home and things that, and how homes trade with, different products out there and, different amount of raising. I mean, real estate is two big components. And, from a scheme, there's sales and there's leasing, and leasing is property management, all kinds of things. And sales is a massive, on average, US home sales is about $2 trillion in a normal year. Investment sales is a third of that. It's roughly, 600-700 billion. And leasing and property management, I think that's, Nate and Alec kind of quantify that, but that's a massive sector that's really hard to quantify. It's not just leasing dollars, it's also property management dollars and all kinds of things. But there's just not the same amount of technology tools in commercial that exist in residential. So I think there's an incredible opportunity ahead of us.
And Alec, would you agree with that, or do you believe that it is becoming increasingly difficult and a crowded space to get your message across to these companies?
I think it depends on the specific vertical you're in. One thing to keep in mind is that it may not be a very crowded space in terms of technology solutions relative to other industries, but you also have customers that may not be set up well to receive and adopt that technology, right? So the capacity for adoption is still lagging behind as well. So I think that, it is something to keep in mind. Certainly that it may not feel like a very crowded space, but to some of these customers, it does feel very crowded, and they're getting pitched left and right by technology vendors that, may all have a, fantastic value proposition to revolutionize, one aspect of their business, but they're not very well set up to receive those presentations, to receive and kind of analyze the potential vendors that they might be adopting. And so to them, to the customers, it does feel very crowded, and they might feel inundated. And so I think, it gets back to, really honing that value proposition and speaking your customer's language and putting things in terms of their pain points in their business, not necessarily in terms of, broad technology adoption, which might be somewhat daunting to them.
Cool. And Nate, the same question to you, but just changing it slightly in terms of how important, when you're investing, is having the clear marketing strategy and having a sales fit with the industry.
Well, for Camber Creek, at least, we tend to invest once a product has, is in market and this demonstrates some product market fit. So it's very, very important to us that, your company already has gotten some meaningful sales. And, that's going to vary widely depending on the product you're offering. It could be a couple of big institutional clients or thousands of consumers, it depends. In terms of the question of kind of it being crowded or not crowded, I mean, there are always going to be a lot of competitors. And so you just have to put yourself in the shoes of the person you're pitching to and understand what they actually care about. Like that specific person in that specific company at that specific moment in time. And, if you just think like it's obviously so great, people should be using it, that's, you haven't even started the journey. And I think one more point, just like from a very practical perspective, is that like anything else in the world, you start with who you know. So like if you're trying to get your first sale, you go to the people in your network that are going to be willing to hear you out just because they know you. And then you get one win, and then you bring that win to the next customer, and you get, I mean, it's like anything else. You just have to go step by step to demonstrate, that you can add value.
Yeah, no, good points. And then Cassandra and Mark, come to both of you. Perhaps Cassandra, starting with yourself. It can be a big decision for a company to go and take external help in the process, whether that be on the marketing side of things or on the sales side of things. How does a company know that they need external help, and when is it the right time to say this isn't something we should be doing in-house, this is something we should be getting experts in the industry to help us with?
Just going back to my earlier point, when you need the help, are you hitting that roadblock? Let's say, what, I've raised X amount of funds, I am ready to go to market, I want to be able to go a little big. How can I get this placement? How can I get this story featured? I've contacted all of the people I know. As Nate said, you always start with who you know. I've contacted so-and-so at Commercial Observer or the Wall Street Journal, or I've contacted a dear friend and peer of mine that once was in PR or marketing or advertising, and no one's really able to help me right now. And I actually don't have the internal help to support me. I think now's the time to look at an agency, to look at a partner, and how can this partner help me? What else are they going to be able to provide? I think when I look at somebody, let's say like a Quinn, not only are we a PR agency, but we would work with Mark and the Atypicals of the world. We would think about amplification. I love how Nate said, how are we going to get creative? Quinn would not only just be your traditional PR agency getting earned media, if you will. We will be looking and dissecting other opportunities for you, whether it's in the digital or social realm. Maybe it is a creative brand partnership that's going to reach that market, that audience that Alec keeps saying, right? We really need to start with the customer, the end user. How are we going to reach said person, said company, said brand, when each of our goals and objectives are going to be hitting different points, different audiences? So that's where we can also look at audience creative partnerships and ideation. So I think, for any brand, for any company that's thinking, oh man, I think now is the time to invest. I know it's going to cost me more than I want it to cost me, but hey, sometimes in order to make magic happen, you have to spend a little more money. So I think when you've hit that roadblock and when you're saying, I feel like I've nauseated every outlet, every path, then you start your RFP process.
Mark, would you echo that?
Yeah, I think there's two things you need to look at. It's sort of capacity and it's experience and specific skills. So do you have the capacity internally to do it yourself? So if you've got the time to spend learning Google Analytics and the paid platforms and building the relationships, then by all means do it internally. If that time internally is better spent in front of customers or potential customers selling your product or service, you need to weigh up the value, and then also skill sets. So the benefit of using an agency or like Cassandra and her team is that you get the experience of a number of different skills that are all kind of contributing to that solution. So you have agencies that focus in real estate, they understand the space, and they can bring a lot of learning and the school fees that they've paid to kind of get to that point and fast track a lot of the sort of obstacles or the problems that you might face doing it yourself.
Great.
I would actually also add to that network. I mean, I think you might feel internally that you have the skill set to craft your story and put together, your press releases, and maybe you're able to do that. But where we find that PR has been significantly beneficial to our portfolio companies has oftentimes just been in terms of network. So the experience of knowing who, which publications are best to target, being able to pick up the phone and already have a relationship with and talk to a reporter at a Forbes or a New York Times or whatever outlet is going to be most beneficial to your company's story. We see a ton of value in using PR just to leverage that experience and that network that even if you have the skill set internally to put together content, you might not be able to take advantage of simply because it's not the industry you operate in.
And Alec, I love that you say use your network, because I think another value add that a firm like Quinn can provide is the fact that I'm not only going to get the network and have the media contacts on my Rolodex, I actually have made introductions with client A and client B. Can client A, PTM, let's call PTM Partners Investment, actually get dollars and some funding from client B? How can I make that network? How can that make sense? So I think something else that's a value add with a PR team is, can they actually introduce me to some of their existing client roster?
I would just say, I think that when you're trying to get press being, and going back to Mark's point, kind of where we opened, being very, very attentive to what you are accomplishing with that press. So for example, if you're going out to raise money from serious venture capital firms, having a piece in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal is very helpful because it adds credibility, right? I mean, that's what getting serious press does. It gives you it's like one more checkbox. But if you're trying to sell to, there was a question on small, medium businesses. I'm from Baltimore. If you're trying to sell to a Baltimore real estate company, getting the Baltimore Business Journal to write an article about how you're adding value in the real estate sector, that could be immensely valuable because that is the local business journal that people actually read. And then when you approach that client, you can say, look at this press we got in the Baltimore Business Journal. They'll be like, oh yeah, I actually, I saw that piece in their newsletter or whatever. So, it's not like the aphorism, any press is good press. That does not apply in this context. The press that is good is the press that will help you accomplish some very specific goal you're currently pursuing.
You're so spot on, Nate. So we are launching a development in Washington, D.C. And sure, did we get them placed in the New York Times? Yes. But then when we look at what the traffic was from Washingtonian and the Washington Biz Journal, those articles is what drove more traffic to the site. So yes, the New York Times is a great plugin. Obviously, who doesn't want that? But when you look at these specific markets, it's really, again, narrowing down who your audience and publications are.
Perfect. We're going to come to audience questions very shortly, so keep them coming in. They're flying in on the Q&A, which is great. So keep them going on there. Just before we go to those, I just wanted to ask each of the panelists, and Jan, I'll start with yourself. I'd love to have gone through this webinar without talking about COVID, but it's obviously had a big impact this year. It's likely to have a big impact on the real estate industry and companies moving forward. So I just wanted to get each of your thoughts on what's changed this year and what is likely to change moving forward. Jan, starting with yourself.
Well, I think the biggest change is men stopped shaving, right? I mean, I think when you get on coast, and I don't think anyone really cares about whether they're wearing jeans anymore or shorts at the, when you sit down. I mean, I think, the real estate or commercial real estate was really a touchy-feely business pre-COVID. That's about to change, right? I mean, it's a different environment. We're in front of other people. And I mean, we'll see, but hopefully that will speed up, hopefully the adoption of technology, commercial real estate, right? But, historically, it was, I mean, that's part of I think Alec and Nate alluded to it, is know your audience, and you had a very old school audience that did things a certain way, and that's the pre-COVID environment. What is the post-COVID environment? Well, people have to figure out how to use Zoom or Google Hangouts, and a lot of 75, 80-year-olds don't know how to do that, and so we'll see how that implements, and we'll see people. Buildings are 20, 30% occupied, in urban settings. So there's a lot of change coming.
All right, Nate?
I mean, just one very concrete, specific thing. Right now I don't have to sell for a living, which is nice. But if I did, I would be very conscious of how I set up my Zoom and my background and the lighting, and I would probably record some videos of myself pitching and watch them. I'd maybe get a coach. I wouldn't underestimate the how different people can come across on video if they're speaking with energy and are well practiced versus not. And unfortunately, that's all you get is that brief moment on the Zoom cam. So I would take seriously that skill set.
You're coming across great, Nate. Don't worry. Mark, your thoughts?
So yeah, we've seen some interesting things happen with being forced to explore other options because the way that we've always done it isn't available anymore. So big real estate conferences that the teams relied on for networking and lead generation and closing national deals, and those aren't available. So what are we going to do instead? And we've seen some very interesting and creative solutions come out of necessity And working with the leasing teams on our, we work with a lot of REITs, and working with their marketing and leasing teams, we've come up with some very sort of creative solutions to the problem, which otherwise wouldn't have happened. So I think the silver lining of the COVID is that it's kind of forced us to come outside of what we've been used to and the sort of traditional way of doing it. And explore more, other options, and some of them have turned out to be better than the way we used to do it. So I don't think it's all bad.
I strongly agree with that. Alec?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the biggest changes that any kind of enterprise sales leader is seeing right now in any industry, but certainly ours, because it's so relationship driven, is that you're not going to these conferences in person. You're not working the floor. You're not having a booth, and it's harder to make those connections. The upside being that you might be saving tens of thousands of dollars a year that you can repurpose in kind of other ways on press and marketing and kind of sales efforts. The downside being you don't have that face-to-face. And you have to kind of get creative with these virtual events that are going on. And where we've seen our companies have the most success is, I guess, being maybe tastefully aggressive, right? Getting that attendee list and reaching out directly to the people who you would be out on the conference floor searching for, and saying, hey, we think we have a great solution for you, and your hit rate's going to be a little bit lower. You might spend a lot more time in Outlook or whatever else, but you can still take advantage of those virtual events in a major way. And I think where our companies have really tried to do that, they have seen some success. And their costs overall are lower in kind of getting those leads, because they're not traveling and they're not paying for booths and other things. So there are certainly still ways to take advantage of those virtual events, I think.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see how people have adapted. Cassandra?
I will speak from the public relations point of view and what has shifted. Certainly the media landscape, obviously, come 8-9 months ago, there were media that were furloughed, that were let go entirely. You probably saw real estate sections dwindling, and if not dwindling, gone for a period of time. So the good news is they are coming back. Certain columnists, editors from specific publications that really hit the real estate space are back. They're taking the content, but the content isn't as much as it used to be. So what we have to do is think about what is the solution. And going back to all of our earlier points is, if we know our audiences and the niches that we need to hit, it was trying to get into solution of what other media outlets and or influencers could help us, get the messaging and news out. So, with every challenge comes a solution. And so for us, yes, while the media landscape is different right now, and certainly not as much opportunity from a traditional point of view, I do think there has created opportunity in the digital realm. And that even includes use of LinkedIn. So what I love that has happened during this time is that I'm seeing so much use of LinkedIn. That is where the networking is happening. That is where I'm able to meet and speak and network with you all, with Bethany, with CREtech. So definitely that's the shift I've seen. And I think that'll continue. And I hope that more of the media comes back. So that's what I've seen.
Great. More LinkedIn inbox messages. Great. So going on to user questions, we managed to audience questions. We managed to knock out about 4 or 5 there, which was great with those answers. I'm just going to ask a question, and then anyone that's got an input on it, please unmute your mic, and I'll come to you. The first one here is: real estate companies are very slow to innovate. How do you get them to open their eyes to innovative tech products? Alec.
Yeah, I think one, my reaction in seeing this question is that there's an interesting kind of implicit attitude in the way that it's phrased, right? I think if you come into the industry saying, how do I get my customers to open their eyes to technology adoption and kind of recognize the value that I'm bringing, you're almost approaching it wrong from the start. I think Nate made this point a little bit earlier. Pay attention to what their pain points are. And you might be solving one of those pain points, but if you start with what's painful for the stakeholders of this organization and how can I listen to them and solve their problems, you're going to see far more success than if you come in saying, how do I wake them up to tech adoption? I think a good example of this is kind of what we're seeing in the AI chatbot space, right? There's a lot you can do with natural language processing and AI, and a lot of conversations you can handle. If you start with that, you might lose your customers. If you start with, I know you're spending a ton on call centers. I know you're spending a ton on, and you're missing leads because you're not contacting them out of hours, et cetera. And you start with that pain point, then your solution is going to be far better received than if you start with your overall vision and try and kind of drag them towards it. So I think it really, comes back to understanding the organization and understanding their pain points.
Cool. Anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, I mean, the topic is you could solve in two major ways. You could solve for revenue or you could solve for expenses. And I think you just need to clearly define those pain points and, message correctly. That's where Mark and Cassandra come in. And, test. And test is, I think what you alluded to, someone alluded to, is it a national campaign or is it a local campaign? I mean, are you going to build a strategy around Baltimore or are you going to build a national strategy? And you've got to define all that up front. And you really have to target the right people, because it's great. You could target, if you're trying to open, you have a product to open doors inside a building, hypothetically, and you could target the property manager, the facilities manager, but ultimately, who's the decision maker whether to buy that product? If it's an expensive out-of-pocket cost, it's the owner, right? And it's, how do you target that owner? And you really need to come up with that strategy up front.
Great. And there's a really interesting question here, which I'm going to reword slightly based on my own personal experiences. But someone's asking about when you're talking to someone within a company and you're trying to sell something to that company, but they may not necessarily be the decision maker, which we've talked about a lot, and you've built a relationship with that person. How do you fast forward, if you don't feel that's going anywhere, how do you fast forward that by wanting to talk to the person, the decision maker, without wanting to sort of tread on toes? Nate, we'll go to you first on that.
Yeah, I saw that in the chat. I was thinking about it. It's a really good question. I mean, I think, if you haven't won over number 3, you're not going to win over 2 and 1. If you have won over number 3, then it's like you guys are on the same team now. You're like, well, we both know this is the way to go. You're going to look good when we close this because, X, Y, Z. What do we have to do to convince the next person? Like, I mean, I think it's that sense of like you're building the team of supporters inside the organization to which you're pitching. That's number 1. Number 2 is like, you just got to gather intelligence. Like you got to ask around, ask other vendors that have sold to this company before, if you know anyone who works there. I mean, I don't think there's like a magic way to do it. You just have to it's like you're like an intelligence gathering operation for whoever you're targeting at that particular moment.
Yeah, I think you really do need to solve all of those pain points all the way up, right? If you're talking to number 3, you need to figure out kind of what you solve and that makes them better at their job, that's going to get them their bonus or get them paid more, whatever. You need to solve all the way up. And if you're coming at it thinking, how do I just get above this person and talk to the stakeholder, that presents its own issues as well. Because if you get, the decision maker at the top to, have, buy-in on your product, but you don't have buy-in from the rest of the organization, they're going to make a top-down decision that might get you the initial close, but over time, you're not solving the problems of the organization, and you might churn out of that anyway. So I think listening to the number 3, listening to the number 2, and solving their problems on your way up to the decision maker is ultimately going to make you more successful in the long run.
Great.
I mean, I think, to the point of information gathering, right? I mean, throughout that process, whether it's 3, 2, and 1, you're gathering information. And ultimately, it's just like, interviewing for a job or interviewing for a college. You start with number 3. Ultimately, the goal is to get to number 1. And, be empowered when you get to 1 with the right messaging, with the right type of information that you could land that opportunity.
Yeah, no, fully agree. Sarah says hi to Nate's dog, but would also like to know how you find a good fit for a digital marketing and/or PR agency. How do you know the right company to work with?
Like we kind of addressed that earlier, no? In terms of, their expertise, what their relationship at the end of the day, what can they take on? I know Mark addressed some of the points too earlier.
I think Sarah's more coming at it from the angle of how do you, not at what time do you go to a digital marketing or PR agency? How do you know that digital marketing agency or PR company is the right one for you? I think is the angle of the question.
From the PR point of view, I mean, honestly, just like anything else, it's all relationship based. I'm sure if you're all going to be doing your due diligence when looking for the right PR firm, you will have that RFP process. You'll probably interview 2 or 3. It's how do they present it themselves? What is their expertise? What kind of similar products have they launched or done in the past? And going back to what Mark had complimented earlier in that, not only are you using the agency and the one singular team that you're getting, we don't work in silos at Quinn, at least. So the expertise you're getting is not only Team Cassie, if you will, Team Cassandra, if you will, but the expertise of Quinn as a whole in the real estate space. So I think depending on the questions you have, the interview and the presentation process will honestly probably dictate the path you go. Sometimes it's just about that gut feeling that you have.
Yeah, and talk to a wide array, cast a wide net, and pay attention to how long it takes them to understand your value proposition and understand your strategy. If right off the bat they understand your company, they understand what you need to solve for and where you need to go, then you're probably going to get along pretty well with them, and you're going to be aligned from the start. And like with any hire, think about your blind spots. Think about what you don't have internally that you need to solve for, whether it's network, whether it's skill set, whether it's expertise, and find a company that's gonna help you solve for that best.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I mean, that the reason Atypical has made the decision from day one to stay focused 100% on the sort of real estate world, whether it's technology companies serving the real estate industry or the sort of owner operator side, is so that we can understand the business sort of objectives and participate and add value to that conversation around building the marketing strategy. Because I think just getting a blueprint and executing it, you can get lost with if you don't have a good understanding of what you're actually trying to achieve and the value proposition and who the audience is. I think things can get disconnected quite quickly. So my suggestion is make sure that the agency that you're working with has a good understanding of your business and your target audience.
Just one other point of this. I mean, I think it's important, and this is something I was thinking about earlier when Mark started the conversation talking about data, is to enter anything you're doing with an air of experimentation and be willing to have chosen to acknowledge if you chose wrong the first time. And with PR and or digital marketing, if you know what you're trying to achieve, you can then evaluate the performance of your vendor against those very specific goals. And if they're not doing it, you have to fire them and get a new one. I mean, that you just have to be very disciplined about this is what we need to achieve. And if it's not working, like, we're going to move on. And if you keep that air of experimentation, like you're doing your best to figure it out, and you might be wrong the first or second or third time, you will eventually find someone great.
Yeah, I think that's Nate. That's a brilliant point. I mean, I think if you work with an agency who sort of wants to lock you into a 12-month commitment, I would be cautious. So our approach is it's month to month, and if we're not delivering what you expect, and we're not helping you achieve your goals, get rid of us and find somebody who can help you do it. So.
And I think that's particularly important with PR because and this is no offense to Cassandra or any PR firm, it can be a little squishy. And so that's why going in with very specific targets that you can measure progress against, and at the end of the day, come up with some numeric or quasi-numeric metrics that you're going to evaluate against.
No offense taken, Nate. And I'd have to agree, and going back to what I said earlier and trusting your gut and it being a relationship, something that, I've learned from Michael Beckerman, founder of CREtech, right? Is that you have to be transparent. What I love about so many of our partners and clients that I work with, it's all about the transparency. be honest with me. If I'm not achieving your KPIs and what I said I would get and achieve for you, let's have this be a conversation. So I think, going back to that gut feeling in the relationship, it is a relationship. The person, the vendor, whomever you select needs to be comfortable in getting addressed and saying, hey, listen, I need for you to get this done for me at certain points. So I do think that's an important part of choosing an agency, especially from the PR point of view, is that relationship and that gut feeling.
Okay, great. And we spoke a lot about how PropTechs get in front of real estate companies. There's a question here on how real estate companies actually identify the solutions that they're looking for. There's often this perception that they're just sitting there waiting for your company to knock on the door. So how do these real estate companies identify these solutions, and how do they actually go out and look for these? You see these heads of innovations popping up everywhere at the moment. So how any insights on how real estate companies go about the process from the other way around?
I'll just jump in quickly, and there's an enormous range. There's no one way to do it. So for example, we're very close with one of the top 10 general contracting firms in the country, and they have a highly disciplined approach. They have a specific team that tests out new technologies. They keep a database, they pilot them. I mean, it's like a serious apparatus. And we know some other large real estate operators where the CEO hears from his cousin about a new cool tech thing and is like, hey, we should do this thing. So, I mean, there's just every range of approach that you can imagine. I guess that's not that helpful, but again, knowing where do you fall on the cousin recommendation from the CEO side or the rigorous review side is important to know.
The best way they do it, of course, is by investing in a fund like a Camber Creek or an RET Ventures, of course. But yeah, it really
strong plug, Alex. Strong.
Completely depends on the organization. They don't all have a VP of innovation who's focused on going out and finding these things. And so for those customers, you might have to work a little bit harder to communicate where you fit in the stack and where you fit in the market, because maybe they aren't as educated as the guy you just pitched who has already spoken to all of your competitors. So it really does vary quite a bit.
I think one of the things we talked a lot about pain points, but I think the concept when you talk about technology is faster, cheaper, better. I would stress the cheaper part in commercial real estate. I mean, that you are particularly around building operations, providing some type of savings, right? I mean, real estate doesn't move that quickly, as it trades, or it doesn't move that quickly in terms of, the ownership of real estate. It's been done, commercial real estate has been done a certain way. But I think a big point is cost savings that people should focus in on. And, I just think that that's a big area, particularly around building operations.
Great. We're coming to the end. Just before we finish, I want to get all the panelists one thought that they want to leave everyone with in terms of the key thing that you need to consider out of the hundreds of things you do need to consider. Nate, I'm going to go to you first because I know you've got a hard stop. So what is the one takeaway you would give to those watching?
Yeah, as I said just a couple minutes ago, I think, approach everything with an air of experimentation and be honest with yourself if something's working. And if it's not, find something else and be scrappy.
Great. Jan?
Have a clear plan, up front before, have a clear plan, a clear vision, and put it down on paper.
All right, Mark?
Plan beats no plan every time.
Mark?
Yeah, I would say define your objectives and have the reporting frameworks to measure your sort of efforts as you go.
Perfect. Alec?
Yeah, if I didn't already sound like a broken record, I will now by just saying, know your audience, right? Do your research, know the stakeholders, know their pain points. And then, of course, what others are saying, have a plan to really go about addressing them strategically, as opposed to just assuming all your customers are going to be similar.
Perfect. Cassandra, last word for you.
Saving the best for last.
Yeah, there we go. Out with the bang.
I'm going to echo what I said earlier, and in the words of Florence Quinn, when it comes to selecting that right PR agency and team, is honestly trusting your gut. You will know when you're interviewing and speaking with them what they know, what they don't know, and what they're BSing. So trust your gut.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to all the panelists. I thought that was fascinating. I hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you for all the questions. We got through as many as we could, and a special thank you to CREtech for hosting such a brilliant event. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.